Hi, everyone. This is Savannah. I use Move Colorado VISTA. We are doing the Youth Empowerment Radio for the second season, and I am interviewing Kathy Alderman from Colorado Homeless Coalition.
The material and information presented here is provided by Lived Experience Youth and is for general information purposes only. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are of those of the guest only and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Youth Move.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Savannah. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you for being on here. So I just have about 7 questions I would like to ask you around the homeless stigmas and myths and different things like that. The first question I wanted to ask was, what are the most common stigmas that show up today for unhoused people?
I think generally our society looks at people experiencing homelessness as if they've failed in some way, as if they, haven't been able to be employed or stay employed, or if they've done something wrong to make their families reject them, or they have, failed to keep their home if they were housed prior. And I think that for youth, what that translates to is that people assume that, young people experiencing homelessness are somehow bad kids, or, they've been rejected by their family, or they couldn't get along with everyone in their household. And so they left their home. And that blame shifting that happens to people experiencing homelessness is really damaging. Because most often, what has happened for people experiencing homelessness is that they suffered a pretty severe trauma that has led to their homelessness. And so I think as we think about solutions, we should really think about how do we not necessarily blame people for their unhoused situation, but how do we help them to resolve it in ways that are meaningful to them?
Thank you. Yeah, I really resonate with that because a lot of people don't have the experience of going through those things and, they kind of just make up these assumptions of these people are just criminals, they're just addicts, they're just X, Y, and Z, and we honestly don't know what their story is until we ask them. I also want to ask with that, what would break the stigma between unhoused people and housed people? Like, what could we do as a society to break those stigmas?
I think that one of the things that we can do to kind of overcome those stigmas is have this very conversation that you and I are having today and asking our friends and families to listen to this information and then to go out and talk to people to figure out what the experience is like for them. What are they going through? I think it really comes down to really trying to start from a place of empathy and compassion and being solutions oriented and saying, I want to help you through this traumatic experience instead of, I want to assume that you can fix it on your own because you must have broken it on your own. And so I really think that, educational opportunities and, community engagement opportunities are going to be the only thing that really help us move past these stereotypes and these damaging stigmas against people experiencing homelessness, especially for youth.
Yeah, I do agree. It's hard being young and just out there, even when you're just after 18 and your family says, you can do whatever. It's hard to just build your life from scratch like that. The holidays is coming up and food insecurity is coming around to those times of, in need. What do you think is the biggest challenge for youth to find food to eat every day?
I think that for youth, especially youth experiencing homelessness who don't have access to healthy food, it can be really damaging in terms of their survival techniques and their emotional and physical growth. We know that nutrition is a cornerstone for, good health, both physical health and mental health. And so if people aren't getting access to healthy food, then their physical and mental health are clearly going to be impacted. I think something else that people don't think about is that when you're constantly worried about where your next meal is going to come from, you're in a, fight or flight mode. So your adrenaline is high, which does, is good for survival purposes, but can be really damaging long term. And so when people, especially youth, don't have access to consistent food sources, then they're constantly running on adrenaline and they're constantly worried about where their next meal is coming from instead of being able to take care of those other basic parts of their life. And it can be really challenging when you're experiencing homelessness to find food, especially if you're unsure about whether you want to go to a food bank. And even if you do go to a food bank, where are you going to store that food if you don't have a home to put it in? There might be some shelters that will provide meals, but you may or may not be comfortable in those environments where a lot of other people are. And then certainly there's an access to money to pay for food that is extremely difficult, especially for youth who are likely exiting their homes without any money, without savings. They may not even be old enough to really be employed. And then so often what we see is that employers will take advantage of people experiencing homelessness and not give them their full wages. And then where do you keep that money if you have it? When you're experiencing homelessness, you're always at risk of having, criminal activity perpetrated against you, having your belongings stolen. And if you are known to have money, on your person, it makes you a target. And so there's just so many barriers for people experiencing homelessness to get access to healthy food. And those barriers are double for youth experiencing homelessness because of the situations that they're coming from.
Yeah, there was many times, when I was homeless, it was hard to just get a job, let alone like be in food service and be homeless because I was thinking like, oh, this job provides a meal every day. I would at least have like one healthy, good meal from this place. But then as soon as they found out I was homeless, they were like, no, we cannot hire you. It's a sanitation issue, even though I was taking showers, carrying around hand sanitizer, washing my hands, like, it was a real struggle. So, yeah, I've been through that as well, just the stigmatizing in employment too. So how can people help out in the community with others that are experiencing food insecurity like that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that folks can do to kind of help our unhoused community get access to the food they need to thrive and survive. One, that, making donations to food banks, making donations to organizations that are doing work with people experiencing homelessness, people who are going out into the community and finding folks that are experiencing homelessness and trying to connect them with food, resources, and housing. So, supporting those organizations. And then, there's an ongoing debate about whether you should give money directly to somebody who is experiencing homelessness. And what we always say is you should do what you're comfortable doing. If it makes you uncomfortable, then you should support organizations that are supporting the unhoused communities. But if you have extra cash and you can share that with somebody who is down on their luck, who's experiencing homelessness, and help them get a meal, that's going to make all the difference for that person for that day and maybe for the next step on their journey to resolving their situation of homelessness. You can also buy food and hand it out directly in places where people are experiencing homelessness, or if that there's sometimes somebody living in the park or staying in your alley behind your house. Leaving food, making food available for folks is always another way to do it. And then, I have to zoom out a little bit and say, from big picture perspective, we've got to start making investments in homelessness resolution and prevention that are meaningful. Like, we need to be investing more in housing. We need to be investing more in food access and healthcare and in all the services that lead people out of their cycle of homelessness into a long-term stable environment. And so until we start making those meaningful investments at the local, state, and federal level, we're going to continue to see people fall into the cycle of homelessness and unfortunately stay in that cycle because they don't have access to the resources they need to get out of it.
Yeah, and I also wanna say, like, for the listeners and the people that don't feel comfortable, like, going to these places themselves or anything, there's online options. Most organizations where you can just donate money, or you can even like Socks Place, for example, I just donated some hot, hand warmers and some deodorant and they have a thing on their website that's linked to Amazon, that's linked to their address, and you can just go on Amazon and buy stuff for them and it'll just arrive there. So that's great. Why do you think this society looks down upon people that do not have enough food? Is it like a status class thing? Or is it just like, because I know when I used to ask for food, people would just tell me to get a job and it's not that easy.
Yeah, I think back to our conversation here about, the stigmas and stereotypes that people have against people that are experiencing homelessness. And I think that that carries over into what people assume about people who don't have access to food, that somehow it's their fault, that somehow they've made the choice to not be employed or to not be stably housed. And, it's just not true, right? But unfortunately, we do live in a world where it's easier to blame people that are in unfortunate situations than it is to help them resolve it or to think through, in a more thoughtful way why they might be there. And so I think, again, we really have to get out of this blame mindset and start thinking more about, you know, what would it look like if this individual did have access to food and healthy food on a regular basis? Might they be more likely to be successful in employment opportunities if they have the nutrients that they need to get up and function every day? I think that we just need we're just we've stopped being a solutions oriented mindset society, and we've really shifted into this blaming, and I just think it's really damaging and really harmful, and in the end of the day, it doesn't solve anything.
That kind of goes with my next question of like where youth don't get enough support from resources. Where do you think youth go when they do not receive enough help with certain resources like Urban Peak and drop ins and shelters?
Yeah, I mean, I think in our homeless response system, we just don't have enough services for youth. And I think that it's important to recognize that sure, everybody experiencing homelessness needs access to housing resources and food resources and healthcare resources. But youth particularly need some additional supports because they are younger. They are often coming out of traumatic family situations. They're developing socially, intellectually, and differently than adults who are in that space. And so we really have to think about how do we support youth in a way that is impactful and meaningful to youth. And unfortunately, other than a few of the organizations that you mentioned, we just don't have a lot of youth specific services for those that are experiencing homelessness. And this is, even more complicated in the rural areas where there's so few services available to anyone experiencing homelessness, much less youth. But what I think we do see is that a lot of young people will try to access services through libraries or through those homelessness organizations that are responding to adult homelessness in the hopes that, maybe they can get some services, get some supports that will help them even if they're not specifically tailored to youth. I think there are a lot of people that forget that we have a lot of youth that are experiencing homelessness that are in the school system. And they may not talk about their unhoused status as much with their peers and their teachers, but people often know. And so I think if those folks are in school, they should be able to get the support that they need, both the food support, the educational support, obviously, the social support, but also some mental health and physical health support through the schools. And so I just, I would encourage folks to think about when we have youth that are still in school and experiencing homelessness, that school situation may be their strongest pathway out of the cycle of homelessness.
Yeah, because the longer youth like stay homeless, they're at greater risk for mental health challenges, including like anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. And preventing homelessness in the first place would just fix those key issues right off top. I mean, unless other things are going on in their life, could happen, but the majority of the time, homelessness is caused by these mental issues. Like these mental issues aren't just there before they get homeless. It's a series of events. Experience is everything to a person. how can others show the ones that have never experienced this challenge before what it really feels like to have like nowhere to go and nothing to eat and like nowhere to be safe? Does the sleep out events, in your opinion, like capture that? Or maybe like people need to do a little bit more research?
Again, I think the very best way to kind of break this divide between understanding individuals' experience, whether it's a housed experience or an unhoused experience, is having these kinds of conversations. It's having people, like you, to tell your story and to explain, what happened to you along the way and where you had barriers in accessing the services that you need. I think that, anytime that we can engage in broader, deeper community conversations, we'll more likely get to solutions. And and I would just encourage, the folks listening to this and the people that they're talking to, like, dig a little deeper and find that empathetic part of yourself, find that compassionate part of yourself. As you said, everybody's experience is completely different. But no one is defined by one particular event in their life. And so for someone to have entered the cycle of homelessness for whatever reason, that does not define them. They're still an individual with hopes and dreams and experiences. And we really just need to kind of, pull back that layer of looking at somebody solely on their housed status and think more about what brought them to that place and what are the things that they are going to do when that situation of homelessness is resolved.
Yeah, it's it's that experience. It doesn't really define anyone, like even living inside doesn't define anyone either. Like on the other side of it. So last question I want to ask you, what preventative ways would you want to see in Colorado for the unhoused population to how to prevent homelessness? Like what are some laws being in place or what are some like changes?
I think we do talk about homelessness resolution so much that I think we sometimes forget about prevention, right? If we can stop somebody from entering the cycle of homelessness, it's going to be so much better for them long term. And frankly, it's far less expensive for the emergency response system if you keep somebody housed that is stably housed. And I think that those supports that need to be provided, and especially for youth, is we need to do earlier interventions with, mental health and behavioral health supports. We need to make sure that our youth, especially that might be in, housing insecure environments, have access to the healthcare they need, that they're staying in school, that they're getting, they're having social interactions and building a community that they can trust. And frankly, we need to make sure that in emergency situations where a family might be on the brink of being evicted or losing their house, that they can tap into a safety net and some local, state, or federal resources that will keep them in that house situation and get them back on a path to stability, rather than letting individual family members or the entire family have to enter the cycle of homelessness, start living in emergency shelter situations, and then try to find housing while they're in the chaos of homelessness. So I think it's if we can try to make investments, I think, in the preventive measures, we're going to see far less stress on the homelessness response system, but we'll see fewer people falling into the cycle of homelessness if we just can provide them with the resources they need to stay stably housed. And then for youth that might have a more chaotic family environment, might be thinking about leaving the home, might be being told by a parent that they are no longer welcome there. We need safe places for them to go and the ability to get back into a living situation very quickly. We just can't let people languish in the cycle of homelessness. It's so traumatizing, and it's so much pressure on mental and physical health. And that is just multiplied by 10 for youth who are still in the process of social intellectual development. And so we just really need I think, a stronger safety net system all around to make sure that people don't fall into that cycle of homelessness.
Yeah, it can be very vicious, and I feel like no person like deserves to live that way. Even if like they got evicted just for not paying rent on time, maybe they're financially struggling or something. Like, but no one like needs to be thrown into the street, into the wilderness, almost like the concrete jungle, as some people call it. So thank you. Thank you for all of your answers and your opinion and information.
Yeah, well, thanks for taking the time today. Thanks for being a voice on this issue for community to learn more. And I'll look forward to hearing how all this goes.
Thank you. Yeah, it's Homeless Youth Awareness Month. We changed it to Hope Awareness Month instead of labeling that as the first thing. It's, like youth need hope instead of being labeled.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.